This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow Cookie to Range, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and today I'm joined by my often co-host Arthur Parkinson, which is incredibly nice, and we are actually going to talk predominantly about his garden, and he's going to set the scene of where it is and what it is, and also the trouble with small kind of village or urban gardens, which is sometimes privacy. And that isn't that you don't love your neighbours, because hopefully you do, but it's just being able to have the feeling that you're in a sort of more populated space, but you've still got your own little womb of a garden. And so it was Arthur's suggestion, actually, to do this as a subject, because I think the more and more of us that live in towns and cities and not so much in the countryside, the more it's relevant that our outside space is a real haven, and having that privacy is a key part of that. So, Arthur, welcome, first of all. How are you?
Hello. I'm all right, thank you.
And then just describe your little mini flower yard in Gloucestershire and the sort of dilemmas that you've had with it.
Well, this episode came about because the original suggestion was a clematis, I think, and at the time I was on the phone to you. I was looking out to the garden, and we've got... like most gardens, it's surrounded by 2-pot wall, and then all the way along the back, a woven willow fence, which is actually metal stakes and then lots of willow woven through the stakes to create a solid fence. But then what we've got is we're completely overlooked by the end of another house, and it's very, very dominating. To be honest, I don't let that upset me, but James actually moans about it all the time. And I know you and Adam kind of go through that as well. Whenever I'm with you, Adam brings up things that you don't mention. And so it's quite interesting when you're trying to garden and create a garden that you and your partner and loved ones like. Yeah. You do have to take on board what other people think.
You do.
And the problem with the small garden is, in one corner we planted a hornbeam, which, to be honest, has become my absolute nightmare, because this hornbeam, within 4 years, has become this huge lollipop, and it's already overshadowing the 2 flower beds that kind of join, like at a T-junction. And it's creating already this like under canopy of quite hard shade for the whole of the summer, because the leaves are very dense of a hornbeam, and because we're lollipopping it, that's encouraging the density.
Yes.
So James, my partner's reaction to trying to defeat this house wall is, let's plant 4 more hornbeams. Now that creates quite large arguments that go on and on into the night, because not only would 4 standard hornbeams that would have to be the height of at least 7 foot be very expensive, but they would kill all my plants because it would just create solid shade.
Yes.
And I don't want just hostas and ferns. We've got them at the front garden where the door is, because that's north facing and shady anyway. Yeah. So I've really got to conserve the areas of the garden that are sunny. But we've got a problem of being completely overshadowed by this house. And it is true, when you open the back door, yes, the garden's gorgeous, but you look up and it is like having a tower block, really. It's a nice facade of stone, but it's still very imposing. So funnily enough, up the woven willow fence, the first year I moved in, I planted a clematis. I think it's a lovely classic one of yours, the violetta one.
Oh, yes.
And so that's got going. And last year, it got to the top of the willow fence, and then it couldn't go any further. Yes. So it just bubbled out into itself. And it looked a bit silly, to be honest. It was like a big blob of a wig that I thought was going to fall off the willow fence, because clematis, they do latch on, but they need a bit like sweet peas, lots of little twigs to latch on to. So this winter I made it my mission to go and coppice as much hazel as I could. And where I live, people don't coppice the hazels. So I came back with like giraffe-sized rods of hazel that I stuffed in the corner of the garden. And then it got to March, and I didn't cut these hazel rods down. I mean, these are literally you're talking 20 foot of hazel rod that I
okay.
managed to coppice and drag back to the house.
Amazing.
And rather than cut them down, I shoved them against the fence. And so now Mr. Clematis has gone up and up and up.
Oh,
and
brilliant.
he's copied exactly what you've got in the Oast garden, which is where you made, and you can talk about this, but you made these wire like pyramids for your clematises. But that's basically what I've done.
But by accident.
Was it by accident?
I love that. You just shoved them in the corner and then they got grown on.
Yeah. So we've got this, you've got the level of the fence and then wonderful, huge spirits of clematis, which have really kind of camouflaged the big wall. So I'm really, really pleased. And I'm going to copy that. So rather than spend loads of money on hornbeams that would kill everything underneath them, I'm just going to plant more clematis.
Brilliant.
And do the hazel rod technique every winter.
Yeah. So we kind of did exactly that, actually, with one of my other favourite clematises, which is called Madame Julia Corriveau. And it flowers in sort of late June through to mid to late August, I think. And what I found is that I'd got them on hazel teepees, so they were perhaps 7 foot tall, but it's quite vigorous. And so by the time it had been growing in the same spot for maybe 3 years, just as you say, it was coming off the top and forming this great sort of sail, which kept catching the wind. And it didn't like it very much because it needed a bit more support. So we started looking for taller hazel, but we actually found it really, because we do coppice our hazel.
You coppice yours.
So we didn't have any as nice and tall as you have. And so we were kind of looking around, and then suddenly, I can't remember, but one of the gardeners said, well, what about rebar? Which I thought, oh, that's not going to look very nice, which is the reinforcing rods that you use to make concrete blocks. And it's a thin metal. It's extremely cheap. You get it at any builder's merchant, and you can, of course, get it to almost any length you want. So we then got from a builder's merchant these 16-foot lengths of rebar. We then hammered them into the ground about a couple of feet or 18 inches, so 45 centimetres. And then we realised that we actually we couldn't just tie them at the top because they were pinging apart. So we actually got somebody with not a soldering iron, whatever it is, to melt metal onto metal. And
welder.
Oh, that's the word, a welder. And so they're permanent structures now. And we then got a metal worker, and he just put these hoops horizontal, so parallel to the ground, in 3 circles to strengthen it. And that is now our Madame Julia Corriveau pyramid. And we have 3 of them. And they give you this fantastic height and really spectacular. And even when they're not covered, funnily enough, I'm really fond of them now. So, and we do tend to put something like a tender perennial climber to extend the season, like a thunbergia or lobata or Ipomoea lobata. And so after the clematis comes that. But even when they're uncovered with plants in the winter, they look rather great, covered in snow and frost and things. So I'm really fond of them. But anyway, that's funny that you ended up with exactly the same thing, but by pure chance.
Yeah, and for urban gardeners who maybe can't go and get hazel because it's hard. I mean, I have to forage mine, and I have to do it very early in the morning. Yeah. Because I do live somewhere where foraging is not really seen as an art form.
Yes.
I think the welding of what you're doing, that could be amazing for all these inner city gardens to copy.
Yes. Because that stuff, corten, is so trendy, isn't it, right now?
Yeah.
I mean, the Chelsea Flower Show was full of that. And it's the same kind of urban, more sort of city feel, that sort of thing. You don't want maybe wood so much in a city. You want it to be a slightly harder material in a way, aesthetically. Anyway, great. So any other clematis in your garden?
Well, I'm really bad. I buy them and then I don't keep the labels on them. And the labels disappear into the little shed.
Yes.
So I know what group I've got. I think all of mine are group 2.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Which can be cut down, can't they, in spring. So that's what I do.
Yeah.
But I left them all last year till at least February because the birds loved them so much. I mean, even though they'd all gone brown and crispy, all the little wrens and blue tits, they were in and out there all the time.
Yeah, that's
and again, it just made the fence look more alive. And I think that's what I'm trying to say. If you're surrounded by just one level of fence, you can really break up what feels like a very human-dominated horizon of fence
Yes.
by making your plants go above that parapet line.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want to do more and more, to make the garden feel more mature and just more wild and free.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
But also I know on your Instagram you've been raving about honeysuckle quite a lot. So tell us about why you love them so much.
Well, more for cut flowers, really, because they don't have the best vase life in the world, but for at least 3 nights, you'll cut them, and then they won't do much during the day. But then, say if you have them in your bedroom or your bathroom, you'll go in when it's bedtime, and you'll just be hit by this gorgeous wall of fragrance. So you cut them, and I think they like to be cut as cut flowers, as long as you go down to a pair of leaves, because that encourages the nice fresh growth for next year, doesn't it? Whereas if you don't cut them, you just end up with very woody honeysuckles.
Yeah, you do.
That don't flower as well.
Yeah. And you need to sear the stem end in boiling water, don't you? I find that makes a real difference to the vase life of honeysuckles.
Yes, yeah. But it's interesting where I've been finding them. I mean, there was a Graham Thomas that I saw yesterday that was literally growing out of concrete almost. They're complete opposite to clematis, as in not needing a lot of feed and mulch.
Organic matter, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. Which is surprising in a way, because they come from a wood, so you'd think they'd like a lot of what I always call hummus, but isn't called the thing you eat made from chickpeas, but you know what I mean. So the other one I wanted to mention, well, there are a couple of others that climbers that I'd love to mention, but the next is, funnily enough, I picked from here to take to Chelsea. So Arthur and I were at Chelsea in the middle to the end of May, and we had a really beautiful sort of treasure trove of a stand there. And I came back here on the Saturday night and picked all the flowers from the garden. And one of the flowers I was really excited by, because obviously in that weird time when the tulips are over, but before the roses have come out in May, often there isn't so very much here. So I ended up picking lots of lupins and foxgloves and things like that. But I also ended up picking a clematis called Blue River. And again, I seared the stem ends in boiling water as soon as I'd picked it, and I took it up on the train the next morning to Chelsea, and we threw it away a week later, still looking absolutely perfect. So I've actually got Jonathan Buckley, the photographer, arriving tonight, and I'm going to do a big vase of clematis, Blue River, and it's this really beautiful sort of bluey mauvey colour, and it's semi-double. And I think that might be why it lasts so long in the vase, because its petals, because it's the semi-double form, are much more kind of robust and less delicate. And I absolutely love it, because you get these beautiful shapes that you do with any climber, with these sort of arching wands of stems with a beautiful great saucer Catherine wheel-like flowers on them. So Blue River, I think, as a cut flower and as a garden plant, and it's actually quite a compact clematis, which I think people like. So we've got it here growing on an arch in the trials garden. And we've actually got it on a silver birch teepee in the perennial cutting garden in a clematis trial for picking. And on both, it just does really well, and it doesn't romp too much, but enough that you can happily feel it sort of cut and come again. And it seems to flower May, June, July. So I think it's a really good one. And we're trialing it this year in a container as well with a silver birch teepee. So, it's shot to the top of the pops for me. And, I want to grow more of it.
I loved it too. And I was amazed, actually, because I put it in the wobbly vase with a lupin.
Yeah.
It was like the big ostrich feather. And its stem was as strong as a lovely proper bit of like Cattlegate wire.
Yes.
And so it draped down, and you'd look up, and it was this most gorgeous. The petals to me did remind me almost of egret feathers or soft eiderdown feathers. They were so beautiful. And then we cut one for a bud vase, and it's got the most lovely outward facing flower that's very upright. I'm so glad you told me the variety, because I fell in love with it too. And it lasted the whole week. It was
incredible.
Yeah,
and
it made my life very easy.
It was hot and it was cold and it was every sort of weather we had. And yet, honestly, I just couldn't believe it when I left the stand. I could have picked it that day as far as the condition of the flower was. So, I really love that. So we're going to do lots more of trialling of that. And one other climber that I really think is good if you want something pretty vigorous and you want to cover a space, a wall or a boundary fence or whatever quite quickly, is another thing that I grow here called Akebia quinata. And there's a particularly good new one, which is called, I think, racemosa, which has got very, very long tresses of flowers. And it's really unusual because it has chocolate-coloured flowers in April, and it has the most extraordinary scent, which is like a sort of fruit sweet. And so I love to arrange it with the sort of coppery-toned tulips in a table centre vase, or tumbling out of a big tall vase of tulips, sort of cascading out and softening the edge. But it is a really, really good, vigorous climber. And it also, if you grow two, which you would need to have quite a decent space because it is strong as a grower, if you have two, it forms this fruit, which you can eat, but I have tried them once and they were rather disgusting, so I wouldn't recommend it. But I think it's worth, as well as clematis, and we've mentioned honeysuckles, but I think it's really worth casting your net to some more unusual ones as well. And I think the akebias are really rather wonderful.
I love all the passion flowers, but sadly, the few times I've tried to grow them the past few years, I think due to bad compost, they've failed. But I think passion flowers are fabulous too if they're in the right place, if they're in a sunny place. And I think the thing with them is you don't cut them back until April in most parts of the world.
Yes, okay. Because otherwise they get frosted. Yeah. Good. Wonderful. Well, then, of course, there are all the annual climbers, which Arthur and I have talked a lot about in the past, but let's not forget them. So things like the thunbergias, the black-eyed Susans, and African sunset is our absolute favourite, which is this beautiful apricot with a crimson throat. And then I'm really mad for Ipomoea lobata, or it used to be called Mina lobata, the Spanish flag.
Yes.
And I've actually been using those quite a bit in plantings this May between dahlias. And I just thought it's worth mentioning that, of course, climbers, whether they're clematis, honeysuckle, akebia, whatever, if you don't give them a climbing frame, they form lovely shapes and they climb up through quite robust plantings. So, for instance, in our dahlia trial beds, we have actually put loads of these climbers through them, because it informalizes it and it sort of creates these lovely, lovely shapes. And last year we had a great, great success with a variety of dahlia called Night Silence, which we're crazy about, which is this sort of matte crimson. It's really amazing, growing next to a brand newly bred dahlia that we're releasing this autumn, which is called Adam's Choice. Named after Adam Nicholson, my husband. Anyway, through that, we grew Ipomoea lobata. And I just put 3 little cuttings. And to be honest, seedlings. To be honest, I actually planted them wanting them to come out over the gravel path, but they didn't like that. They decided to grow upwards through Adam and Night Silence. And it was just this really triumphant combination by pure luck, not design. And so this year we're copying that whole concept and putting all these tender perennial or annual climbers all the way through, and thinking about like the heavenly blue Ipomoea, which is so vivid, with a bright pink dahlia like Happy Single Juliet, and, going for sort of maximum contrast. And unlike sweet peas, which really you cannot grow with dahlias, they just don't flower at the same time or perform at the same time. With those tender perennials, they work incredibly well.
And they're all brilliant for small gardens. I've actually done lots of thunbergia in fairly small terracotta pots, up little mini wigwams. And I've got a big salvia in a larger pot in the middle of these little pots. And already the thunbergias are coming up off the wigwams and going through the salvia love and wishes. And I just love the lovely velvet purple with then the lovely apricot bonnets of the thunbergia.
Yeah.
And in hanging baskets, say maybe you've got a balcony garden,
yes,
where you open your door and straight away you're just facing other balconies. You could have 2 quite deep triangular hanging baskets.
Yeah.
Fill them with the thunbergia and I'm sure the Spanish flag as well.
Yeah.
And as Sarah said, they'll flow out of the hanging basket like Medusa, lovely snakes, floral snakes. And they'll just create these amazing Georgian wigs of flower.
Yeah.
And again, unlike sweet peas, they seem to cope much, much better in containers and they don't need as much feeding. So I think they're really, really fantastic for small gardens.
Great. And just to finish that, we went to a big trial in July last year a huge trial of one of our suppliers, growers, and they had Lothospermum, which used to be called Acerina, I think, or they're very similar anyway, growing in a shade hanging basket. And I was blown away by that. So we're copying that this year and we're trying it in a shady spot. So a deep, like you say, those conical hanging baskets, because they've got good soil or compost depth. And I've planted just in the last few days 3 of these little seedlings to cascade down. And I'm really hoping by sort of September, October, November, I can move them perhaps into the greenhouse. And there they might even keep on flowering because they're tender perennial all the way through the winter to cheer me up when we're sort of shut here. But anyway, yeah, climbers going up and climbers left to just ramble and climbers coming down. All of them are unbelievably valuable sort of structural design additions to borders and gardens and flower yards. So we'd say more is more, wouldn't we, Arthur?
We certainly would, for privacy and beauty.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Lovely to talk.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Grow Cook Eat Arrange with me, Sarah Raven, and Arthur Parkinson. And next week, Arthur and I are back again, and we're going to talk about our favourite pelargoniums. We are passionate about pelargoniums. I guess we share lots of things, and it's our favourite plant choices, and definitely they are tulips, but even more dahlias and pelargoniums. So join us then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.